since we all eat, we need to grow our plants in rich soil from which the plants will gather nutrients, minerals, so they can grow, and through them, we get our nutrients as well. But if you think of soil, what is the structure of that soil? So here I have a cross section of a horizon on, let's see, it's not perfect. We have different soil horizon. And here we have a situation where the soil hasn't been disturbed in decades, if not centuries. So let's see what we've got here. At the top here, we have humus. That's the top part, made almost exclusively of organic matter. So as the plants are growing, plants are also dying. So you have here these white pieces, dry blade of grass. They decompose, and here you have the highest carbon content here, the most organic matter, and that's why plants are working so well. Right under, we have what we call the topsoil. So topsoil is going from up here to about down here. In this part here, we have a mix of organic matter and different soil. Now, keep in mind that as the plants are growing and dying and decomposing, we have organic matter here. We also have rain that takes some of the organic matter and bring it down. And on top of that, as these plants are growing, they are pushing some roots deep into the ground to get nutrients. And you can see some of them go all the way to about here. So here you have, and when the plants are decomposing, some of the organic matter comes in this part. If you're on a farm and you are labourer, what is it called, to plow? When you plow the fields, you are turning around the soil so that some of the organic matter here comes further down, some of the materials here come to the top, so that you're mixing the soil to maximize growth. Because in the soil, we have nutrients, we have particulates, we have microorganisms, making sure that everything grows well. So this is what we call the topsoil. Right under, we have what we call the subsoil. So the subsoil here is it's like the boundary between the topsoil, and here at the bottom we have some parent materials. So further down here, when it rains, the water goes down. So here often we have lots of water. Second, oxygen doesn't come down here very often. Third, microorganisms don't live very much down here because they like the organic rich materials at the top. And here this part doesn't get moved very much. So this is like a parent material. And just above, between the boundary here, we have what we call, and I mentioned it, the subsoil. This part here is when you have rain pushing some of the carbon-rich materials, but also with the water table. When it rains, it goes up. When it's drier, it goes down. So here we have a layer that is a mix of roots, a mix of materials that are rusting, because when water comes up, brings humidity. When it comes down, we have air going through, and therefore it's oxidizing. It is oxidizing this layer right here. So if you're thinking of a living soil, this is this part right here. If you are in a swamp, for example, the thickness of the humus here and the topsoil is much thicker. If it happens you're in a dry environment and the plant's no longer here, the wind will push away all these organic rich matter, and then you end up with parent materials that are being pushed around with the wind. And that's why we have sand dunes and rocks in the desert. And what happens is that the sand is like a yellowish color, nothing that is organic there, and it's very hard to grow any food. So here I have a quick cross section. So we have here the horizon here, very, very thin of humus. If you go in the forest, this could be thicker because an old growth forest has had tons of years to bring down leaves and decomposing the organic matter. Here we have our topsoil. The more an environment is good. So here, if you think of a farm, you want to make sure that you are keeping this horizon nice. Here we have the subsoil. So here, this is a place where the roots will go down because the water goes up and down in this environment. And here you have the parent material. Now, in order to be able to have good soil, you need to be able to have a good porosity. When I think of a porosity, think of a sponge, for example. A sponge is a square piece of material, and then when you put it in water, it absorbs water because there's so many holes into that sponge. So you want a soil that is full of little holes so that the air and water can circulate freely. Organisms like insects and worms can play around, and that's one of the reasons why there's so many little tunnels and ways for the water to go through and for the roots to easily go down here in the subsoil. So all of these are very important. So when you are having a farm, when you think of a farm and you have this horizon here, and let's go back, this horizon there, you are planting, plants are growing, dying, and then you can renew the soil. However, if you are, for example, in a farm or you are in a place where you are extracting food very fast, we cannot consider soil to be a renewable. We have to consider soil to be a non-renewable resource. Because let's say that we are growing corn, wheat, or other plants, and that we're harvesting the plants. What happens is that we're harvesting organic matter from the plant, but it's depleting some of the soil as well. So in some ways, every year, the level of the soil will go down because nutrients are extracted over the years. If we are using an organic farm, for example, then what happens is we are trying, the yields of it's lower. We're using some natural fertilizers. So we're trying to have a long-term care for our soil. Therefore, it can produce for longer. Now, the yield is less. Farmers make less money, so it could be tricky. What we do here in some places where farms are in high production rate, we are putting, for example, wheat and corn, which are extracting resources here. But if we're extracting these plants, the corn, the wheat, faster, what happens is that the nutrients here in the soil are getting weaker and weaker and poorer. So what happens is that we add chemical fertilizers in these levels. Chemical fertilizers could be a good idea. However, you're trying to use a chemical to try to nourish the soil that is being depleted through plants. So the soil are never as good because you're putting fertilizers with a few specific fertilizers, like phosphorus, phosphate, potassium, nitrates. But a plant, when it grows, it needs a variety of nutrients. So over the decades, of the centuries, there's the breakdown of the rocks, the clay. So what happens is you end up with a rich soil. If we're not careful, the quality of the soil can go down. Another thing that we talked about in class was about how we look at the composition of a soil to make sure it's the best for us. So here they divide the soil here in 3 different groups. So here we're not looking for organic matter, we're looking at what kind of soil is down here. Because eventually this will be part of what we have up here. So you could see these rocks here, sand and silt, is very similar to what we have down here. So here we have 3 components. We have sand. So the way we look at this triangular graph, if we start here at 0, you go to 10, 20, 30, all the way to 100. So 100% of the dirt is sand. You end up with sand right here. Sand are particles that are maybe 0.05 millimeter all the way to 2 millimeters in size. Sand is important because it brings a porosity in the soil so that water can move around, and it's a great support. The other one that we often know is about clay. Now, if you've done pottery, for example, clay is a very, very fine matter. So you've got, for example, soil, you've got rocks, you've got all kind of materials that over the centuries, the millions of years, these rocks break down in smaller little rocks, and then you end up with a powdered part. So here the diameters would be like 0.005 millimeters, for example. quite small. But what is interesting is that these are fine particles that will stay in suspension in water. So if you have, for example, a creek and you have brown water, it's that clay that is dissolved. And you can have 0% all the way to 100%. 100% clay is not good at all for farming. And the reason for that is that if you have, for example, if you have a little pond, now let's say a puddle that has some clay in it, when it dries, you have that crusty clay at the top. It's not porous. And if there's a seed, it cannot have roots going through. Insects, worms, it's not a great environment for them. So the clay does exist. Some beautiful clay is great for pottery, but for farming, it's not good because there's no porosity that can allow water to move through. And on the other one here, we have silt. So here there are particles having size in between clay and sand. So here you have 0 silt all the way to 100% silt. And here it's a fine, it's not sand, it's much finer than that, but coarser than clay. So what we want in a farm is something more or less in the middle right here. We want some sand so that we can have a good porosity of the soil. So when it rains, the water comes through, and that's great. We want a certain concentration of clay because clay gives insects, worms, plants easy access to nutrients, and that's wonderful that way. And for silt here, it's in between. So when you have a good mix of the three, it's excellent. Now, in order to make this much better, is if you are adding some, what's it called? I forget, some organic matter. So that here you have a soil that has a good support, and then you have enough nutrients to make sure that the plants can grow. So if you can go here, we have here our soil. We want to have clay, sand, and silt. And here we have the same here. You can see some rocks here, sand and silt. But when you have a mix of organic matter, that's when you end up with the best quality soil for farming. If it's too poor, it's not good. If it's too rich, it's not good either. I know that some vegetables, for example, potatoes prefer some sandier soil. And the reason for that is that potatoes don't like too much humidity, because if it's too wet, then the potatoes rot. So a more sandy soil is better for them, so that the water percolates through. Water is available, but it doesn't stagnate. So that's an example. Other plants, for example, if you have potting soil for your home, we have a very, very rich organic matter content to maximize the nutrients for the plants. But in nature, when you have to feed millions of people, and on our planet, billions of people, we need to make sure that we're protecting our soil right here. Very good. So if it happens you have any clarification questions or something you're thinking about looking at this segment on soil, please put your comments or questions in the comment below. I'm always looking at them, looking for ideas to create new videos. On this, I'm going to put here another video here about science that you will enjoy. And don't forget to subscribe, because we always have several videos weekly so that we can learn about science. I'll see you in the next video.